Okay, welcome back. We're talking about chapter 12, which is neuroscience in the brain. And one of the many reasons I love this textbook, which you're very tired of hearing me say, I'm sure, is the fact that it has this chapter. I feel like neuroscience is the future of our field. If we don't understand this, then we can't really help our clients because we are now able to look at the brain and see mental illness and understand all the different reasons or factors that are impacting mental health, such as diet and exercise, sleep, the gut-brain connection. We know there are more neurotransmitter receptors in the gut now than the brain for serotonin. Now, all that to say, marginalized populations have a really difficult time with these higher order wellness activities when you can't get access to healthy food or you don't have time to even think about healthy food. When we think about those of us who are stressed and you're in graduate school, even myself, it's easier for me to throw a frozen pizza in the oven than make a healthy meal for my family because of my schedule. And I know about all of these things. So if it's hard for us to do, you can imagine that it's next to impossible for many people and not even attainable. But we do know that we can change depression and anxiety and all sorts of other mental health issues with diet and sleep and exercise and just wellness activities. We know that the brain changes and it prunes and it accommodates and it consolidates, and dead neurons are sloughed off and pruned. And so we have all this data that we didn't have when I was in school. So first and foremost, let's talk about neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. Neuroplasticity, this from 2012 in your text, defines it as the process by which the brain is remodeled in response to both internal metabolic conditions and external factors. These processes include changes to the neuron, changes in the connections of the synapse between the neurons, the pruning, and then the neurogenesis of the creation of actual new neurons. And then neurogenesis comes from the natural process of removing those discarded synapses, unnecessary neurons, and then growing new ones, and that is called neurogenesis. So we're born with more neurons than we need, and those are pruned off throughout our life. And every night when we sleep, I'm getting ahead of myself. I know I am. Okay, yeah, hang on. So, don't y'all love these slides? I'm so proud of myself. I mean, PowerPoint just came out with some new templates, and they are fun. Isn't it more fun to learn with these beautiful pictures? So I've already said this, but neuroplasticity means our brain is constantly pruning and growing and changing and sprouting and strengthening and weakening, and all these brain therapies we do, that's what we're doing. I am strengthening neuronal connections or severing neuronal connections in EMDR. I know this is true. I have the data to back it up, and it is amazing to me. We didn't always know this was possible. We used to think, oh, you have this disorder or you have this issue and you're stuck with it and your brain is static, and when you lose it, you lose it, and that's it. But now we know that's not true. This process of neuronal pruning, which I talk about a lot with EMDR as an example of how EMDR works. But we're removing anything that's not working, the degraded, unnecessary kind of waste that needs to be moved or degraded. And the way that happens is when we sleep, glial cells come from our spinal fluid and they kind of clean house. They destroy toxins, clear away debris from obsolete connections. Those connections are no longer working. And honestly, that's what we're doing in EMDR. I am cutting a connection and I want it pruned out of there, and I am strengthening a positive connection. I have made a new association, a new neuronal connection. And I actually have a slide in a minute to actually show you some proof of this. And what's happening in a stroke and a brain injury and things in your text, and please make sure you read this entire chapter, that removes, that's happening to damaged neurons. So there's the axonal and dendritic material that is damaged. And in healing that, it is removed. So you may be wondering, why are you telling me this? Why do we need to know this? We're not in school for this. You are in school for this. And I think maybe in the next couple of years, we may have a whole course devoted to this. At some point, we may even prescribe meds. We are getting to a point where we understand that everything really is coming from stress. Most of our health problems are stress and trauma. You link most of it back to that, quite frankly. So that you have to know about this, and you also have to know that there's stuff you can do to help this process. Look at all these strategies to increase neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. I get a little excited about this because I'm thinking, wow, we can help people regenerate neurons in their brain and get rid of neurons that are not working. So look at all these different ways your text talks about strategies. So let's go through each one of them. And instead of me doing a slide for each one, we can just talk about them. We're going to spend a lot of time in class. I'm going to do a live neurofeedback demonstration when we get back together. We're going to talk about your wellness plan because all of that information is in this chapter, and really kind of get into all the ways that we can help our brains be stronger. And exercise. You're probably tired of hearing about this, right? Exercise. Yeah, I know that's good for you. But really, I exercise probably 3 times a week. And when I don't get to the gym, I am not as healthy. I can't think as clearly. I already have trouble with focusing. And it really, really helps me. And so I really work out for this reason. Because it really helps me stay healthy in my brain. And the way that it actually does that, it increases our cardiorespiratory fitness, but it also increases the gray matter in our brain, in the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. And it helps us be able to think more clearly, be able to have a better memory. And exercise is really, really helpful in staving off a lot of illness. Now, another one that's on this list is enriched environments. Wait, I think I was recording and didn't know it. Okay. One of the things I like about this text is when we talk about enriched environments in each one of these categories, there's actually studies that are more current, a lot of really current studies and information to back these up. And I love this one in enriched environments about the mice. There are multiple studies with mice. One in which I was thinking was mice. It's an old psychology study, and they put mice in a cage with overcrowding and not enough food, not enough water, nothing to play with, no stimulating environment. And they started like cannibalizing their children and murdering each other. And, mice are pretty smart and really social. So that's not their normal behavior. They usually, work together. So when the little mice had a cool house, and like Johan Hari talks about this too. There's when we did the Chasing the Screen video, but this is a different study that I'm talking about. And they had, this is not the cocaine water study, but they had little mouse wheels, plenty of food and water, plenty of, I don't know what you call that stuff that they make a nest out of, but they had all these different, spaces where they could break out with their families, and they just thrived and flourished. So if you take that study and then reference the study in this book talking specifically about the hippocampal matter in the mice, you see that when they had an enriched environment, they then looked at their brain and they had this fivefold increase in hippocampal neurons. And just for context, because many of you may not know much about the hippocampus and what that does, I just pulled up this article here so that you could reference it. Hippocampus is a complex brain structure embedded deep in the temporal lobe. It has a major role in learning and memory. Also is a major player in EMDR. Okay. It is plastic and vulnerable structure. It gets damaged by a variety of stimuli, and it is affected by neurological and psychiatric disorders. We know, and look at this with atrophy and your hippocampus is affected um, when you have Alzheimer's. You want to take a look at some of this here. I can put the link in or you can just Google it. So, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute. But look at all of this information now. It is also part of the amygdala, which is the fear-based area of the brain, stores fear-based memories. Now, what's interesting about this is in EMDR, after, this is escaping me. I wanted to say 10 sessions, or is it 15? It's right around there. And then there's an 11% increase in the surface area of the hippocampus. I mean, it grows. Because why? Because of neuroplasticity, neurogenesis. That was not me. That was my cat. Jeez. Let me pause this. Okay, I think the cat's okay. So then we move on in enriched environments. Again, we could talk about this a lot because then you look at the adverse childhood experiences study with the longitudinal study over 18, 20 years, where we discovered that the correlation with the number of adverse childhood experiences and mental and physical and all sorts of other issues and later in life, the correlation there. And that's mentioned in this chapter at some point. So if you aren't in an enriched environment, your brain is going to be the opposite. It's not going to be healthy, and there's not going to be new connections. You're going to have a really small hippocampal area, as well as other issues I could get into, which is we inherit a propensity, we inherit trauma too. So I could get into this now, but we inherit, if we have PTSD in our history, there was a study from 9/11 offspring and, Holocaust. I need more coffee. Holocaust offspring. Now, those offspring, I'm talking not impacted by the event. Like let's say Holocaust. Let's say they're great grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. That's about right. That I'm cross reference with the 9/11 offspring, but they weren't directly affected by the trauma. They were born with abnormalities in their brains, like suppressed cortisol, which you would think, oh, that's probably good. But suppressed cortisol causes a lot of problems for you. You're born with a reduced window of stress tolerance. And so not only are we talking about an enriched environment here, we're talking about you could be born, if you're born into poverty, you're born with, you didn't get dealt a great deck in your brain because your brain's already having issues from your genetic material from them not being an enriched environment. And then you perhaps are born into an environment that is not helpful either. So learning also is next. We know that learning creates new synaptic connections, and that's proven in the brain. So that's growing and strengthening. But if you can't be healthy, you also can't learn. So these are several things that kind of go hand in hand. Now, Attention in your book is talking more about the brain effects from us attending and reflecting and listening to our clients and being aligned with them. I went to a meditation and EMDR training. I think I've mentioned it. And we were in resonance, is what she calls it, this energy connection with the client. And I don't always use it. If I'm stressed and not where I need to be, I often don't even think about using it. It's funny how that works, but when I do use it, it's just a really beautiful connection with the client when we meditate together before doing the trauma work. So this great study where we look at the brain with MRI shows active listening lights up and activates the brain. When we're attending to our clients, it actually activates the ventral striatum. That's part of the brain's reward system. When we summarize, like motivational interviewing, you think about OARs. When we summarize, that's associated with the the default mode network, which is needed for reflection of self and others. And I will tell you what's really interesting for my work and being able to see the brain when we do a neurofeedback QEEG. A lot of times we see issues with complex trauma in the default mode network. And what that is a sense of self, who you are. And it's really corroborating when I get that data. It's really interesting, when you already know some stuff. I could probably talk about all of this for hours, so I'm not going to do that to you guys. It is fall break now, and hopefully you will still listen to this before we meet. Mental practice, that is also helpful for the brain. We know that visualizing the golf swing or making the shot will actually cause changes in your brain and give you more of an ability to make that happen. It is also CBT. If we can mentally say affirmations, positive statements, refute those distorted cognitions, then it's going to strengthen a neuronal connection. The problem and the caveat for me with this one is often people cannot do that because they're so out of their window of tolerance that their brain is not healthy enough to do that. You actually can't access that part of the brain to do that. And so I love it and it works, but it's also difficult for some clients. In my experience of almost 20 years, I have found that to be problematic sometimes, which is why I love the EMDR. I'm just biased, sorry. We know that massive physical practice can reinstate motor movement. And this is physical therapy, right? You have a stroke or speech therapy. This is what that is. Where you go 3-5 times a week and they give you exercises to do when you're not with the physical therapist or the speech therapist. And then over and over and over and over and over and over working it can regenerate it. So also very important. Medication. We talked all last chapter about medication. Your text talks about the atrophied brain when you have PTSD, a major depressive disorder. And your text talks about that's due to the effect of stress hormones or glucocorticoids. They're elevated when you're stressed and depressed. Antidepressant medication can activate those receptors, help reduce the effects of stress, and then increase hippocampal neurogenesis. It can reverse the deficits. I refer a lot for meds, and I talked about that in the last chapter, but we have medication for a reason, and especially right now, and I don't know where we would be. I really don't. Almost my entire caseload's on something at this point because of the stress we've all been under. And while we all want to pretend that everything is just rosy, it's not. So I think that is also stressful. So everyone's still in stress, but either people are just exhausted and, not knowing what the future holds. There's so many different things going on. And so medication is a great tool. So don't shy away from that. Transcranial stimulation, I don't know much about. And I want to start doing it because I'm hearing such great things about it. So I'm so excited that we get to talk about it now. I'm trying to find someone who could come show us how it works. It's really akin to like electric shock therapy, electroconvulsive therapy, which is still used to some degree, but now this is a much safer way to do it. It's a much lower electrical stimulation. And we're going to talk about neurofeedback in a second because neurofeedback is operant conditioning. It actually does not have a voltage going into the brain. It's actually just measuring and rewarding the brain. It is not putting electrical impulses into the brain. And to my knowledge, without me looking, it makes sense to me. Like I often wish, boom, I could just go in there and tweak. That hurts. Like the brain has an overoperating 10 hertz. It's electrical impulses. If you think about, I had this to the right, like that's what it looks like. It's, electrical impulses. I just moved my hand and that was a whole electrical impulse saying move the hand. And so, all of our overall brain is supposed to operate. All the wavelengths in our brain are supposed to be in a certain hertz level. And that's an amplitude and a frequency of an electrical voltage. And so like delta waves are low, say 6 to 8 hertz. And then there's alpha and there's delta. I just said delta. There's theta, beta, and high beta that we use in neurofeedback. And in all the regions of the brain, those hertz are supposed to be the same, and they're supposed to be congruent on left and right hemispheres. You want your left and right hemisphere to be on the same hertz. Well, they're not. I mean, I've looked at 200 QEEGs at this point, and they're not. Oh, I'm stretched. Sorry. I should probably edit that out, but maybe it'll wake y'all up too. Anyway, so they're way off. So yesterday I was brain training someone and their alpha waves were 42. Okay, they're supposed to be way like 10 to 12 hertz, I think. So what if I could go in there and tweak it? Or what if they're so low, like they're low power map, they have no amplitude, they are just down in the bottom. What if I could go in and tweak that with this transcranial stimulation and then keep doing neurofeedback? That would be so cool. So there is amazing research on this. We actually referred someone for ECT, and they may have done CES, but I don't know anyone around here that does it. But we had a severe postpartum case, and it ended up in North Carolina. They went and did it, and it was amazing results. So this is something you guys can do. And I think that as clinicians, you look at all this and go, wait a minute, that's not what I can't do that. Well, this is where we're headed. And so you get to do talk therapy too, because they need that too. They need to have that too. But then you can work on their brains and get their brains healthier, because if their brain's not healthier, it's a lot quicker to do this than trying to do CBT and brief solution focused over a period of time and then hope that they're compliant. So I'm going to see if I can find somebody to come show us this, but it's a weak electrical current, less than 4 milliamps, and it reduces cortical activation, produces a state of relaxation, reduced fatigue, decreased ruminative thoughts, also increases blood plasma levels of endorphins, serotonin, melatonin, norepinephrine, treats anxiety, depression, insomnia. Look at this thing with the tongue. That's weird. What is that? The portable neuromodulation stimulator. Never heard of that. Look, we're learning together, guys. Learning together. I have already described neurofeedback probably much better than your text did. So it is effective in treating everything. I can't say that because I can get in trouble with the medical society. So I have to say train. I can't say treat because that could be in trouble. And I think we're not popular sometimes because it's so effective that it could be used in lieu of lots of doctors. We're going to do a live one in class so you can actually see it and understand it, because for years I was so interested in it, but I was lost because people would go neurofeedback and I'd read a little bit about it in a chapter, or I'd go to a workshop for an hour and I thought, what in the world? How does this work? How are you watching something and the spaceship is flying with your brain? I couldn't wrap my head around it. And it's hard to understand, but it's really not. I think a lot of people overcomplicate things. So you're just measuring the brain waves. You're measuring the brain waves and you're getting an overall measure of the brain, QEEG. Then you come up with your treatment plan. Parts of the brain may be working perfectly normally. We don't need to target that. They may not be sleeping. Then we need to start back of the brain, 0102. We hook up electrodes. We do eyes closed treatment first, then eyes open. Eyes closed, we put relaxation music on. They relax. the more that their brain waves are working in the right hertz, it's calibrated in the software for it to be like, oh, wait a minute, we want your hertz to be 10 hertz. That's there. So every time the back of the brain with the electrodes measuring that hits 10 hertz, you hear the music more clearly and you get a reward tone. I mean, basically, we're ringing the bell, right? And that's classical conditioning, I know, but it's similar, right? And we're operantly conditioning with a reward. Your brain's like, oh, I can hear this better now. And over the course of 6 to 7, 8, 10 times in that one region, you get into activation on a regularly, and your brain starts to know it's supposed to work that way. And then you move to the next area. So it's really cool. Meditation and talk therapy, two of my favorite things. As you all know, meditation is highly effective. Many of you already know this, but there's plenty of research articles in this entire chapter that back that up. That actually changes your brain, as well as talk therapy.